Good afternoon, and welcome to the Roaming Mind. My name's Antonio, coming to you from Sydney, Australia. And well, I'm taking the journey today to further form a Catholic mind rooted in truth, tradition, and the timeless wisdom of the Church. And my aim with this channel, right, was to go on a journey with men and women who, like myself, have the time restraints of everyday life, family, kids, tiredness, uncertainties, and to delve into the depths of the Catholic Church and Rome, in terms of roaming through something, all of it has to offer intellectually, historically, spiritually, and so much more. So, hence the name of the channel, Roaming Mind. Spelt as Rome as the place where the Bishop of Rome is residing, whereas Catholics, we believe, is the unifying seat of all the church. And in terms of roaming, and we explore, but to forge minds, to forge deeper minds that are Catholic and in line with Christ. So I'm sure many people will say it's a lame name, which is fair enough, though I feel perfectly embodies my aims and the intention of the channel. So tonight, we enter into the church's battle for justice, right? Through the lens of Rerum Novarum, a document that didn't just respond to the crises of its time, but in a sense laid the foundations for how we as Catholics, and you could argue how the rest of the Western world think, lives, and fights for a just society today. So this encyclical was written by Pope Leo XIII in 1891, and it was a revolutionary piece of work which set the groundwork for a standardized and clear form of Catholic social teaching. So I say standardized and clear forms because these teachings were always present in the church, but due to the demands of the Industrial Revolution and its revolution, Pope Leo wrote so many encyclicals on what states are, how they should govern, what it is to be a Christian in the world today. He wrote against communism, socialism. And so he wrote Rerum Novarum as a beautiful guide, focusing on capital and labor, and it laid that groundwork very clearly, very concisely, and very beautifully. I would argue he had a very amazing way of writing, especially reading the translations in English. It's still beautiful, so there's something there. Imagine I could actually read it in what he produced it in. So, well, before we kick off, please like and subscribe to this video, to the channel. We want to grow. We want to get the word out there, and we want to really just draw other Australians and other people, whoever around the world, because it's the internet, to really take on the importance of exploring the key topics in the depths of the Catholic Church. So I know I'm probably lagging a little bit, and I apologize. I'm not at home, but hopefully it will pick up. Okay, so first off, I want to just get some context of the world we're in and the world we're looking at when this piece was written, right? So it's very important we understand the context of when the context of the time of Rerum Novarum was written. So as you can see, there's a picture of a bishop there. Many of you may know who he is, and many of you may not. This is Archbishop Mannix. He was a bishop of the Archdiocese of Melbourne, and he had a very influential part to play in Australia in regards to social issues in the early 1900s, so middle 1900s, following the impacts of Rerum Novarum. And so we'll see a bit of that in as we move forward, of the context of Australia in regards to the Industrial Revolution and labour movements and the issues it faced, and vice versa. So to start off, I just want to sort of reflect on some key passages at the beginning of Rerum Novarum that will, I guess, give us a clear understanding of the context of the piece, as well as the context of the world that we're addressing. So the spirit of revolutionary change, which has long been distributing the nations of the world, should have passed beyond the sphere of politics and made its influence felt in the cognate sphere of practical economics, is not surprising. By degrees, it has come to pass that working men have been surrendered, isolated, and helpless to the hard heartedness of employers and the greed of unchecked competition. A small number of very rich men have been able to lay upon the teeming masses of the laboring poor a yoke little better than that of slavery itself. So very grim, yeah, very grim. So key themes here, I guess, it's a grave and pressing social question, yeah, and the rise of industrialization as that social question. What does this mean for man, right? There's obviously growing inequality. There's a few rich and the very poor who are suffering. And I guess Pope Leo, as the head of the Roman Catholic Church, sees the urgency and steps for the church to provide proper teaching and guidance in this area. Okay, so if we look at context of the time period leading up to Rerum Novarum, in regards to, I guess, more of a Western point of view, European, maybe American, North American point of view, we're seeing that the 1760s between 1840s is when the Industrial Revolution begins in Britain and spreads to Western Europe and the USA. In 1789, we have the French Revolution, a major change in the political order of Europe. It's taking down of the monarchy. It's the masses causing havoc. It's something unprecedented, unseen before. And then we jump forward to the 1830s and 1840s. And so we're seeing that there are early labor movements happening in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. And their workers are organized into trade unions and they're protesting against bad conditions, long hours, low wages, I'm sure unsafe work conditions and all the above. In 1848, there are a number of failed revolutions in Europe, in Italy, Germany, I think France again, a couple others. And it's a time in Europe where there's a lot of unrest. So the workers, who are being, I guess, influenced by socialists and other political movements, are coming together, and there's just a lot of conflict. And at the same time is when the Communist Manifesto is written by Karl Marx. And so that, in a sense, was brought out at a time of immense chaos in the world. In 1849, a year later, the sitting Pope condemned socialism. Now, this is really important. In 1870, the unification of Italy happens. So this is where Garibaldi and the king and everyone, they invade the papal states in Italy and all above. I say invade, other people say reclaimed. But they take the church's temporal power ends. The papal states are gone. There are conditions where the Pope can just dwell. The Vatican City, as we know it today, is what was left. And the Pope's actual temporal power in terms of running a state are completely taken away. So you can see already since the Industrial Revolution to 1870, it's like 100 years, so much has changed. We then in 1871 have the rise of the German Empire, and I can't really pronounce this, but the Kulturkampf. I'm not German. The German out there, please send me a video and teach me how to actually say this. But what that was the German government, who was run by the head of state, which it's blanking on me at the moment. They were trying to control the power of the church in society. They were trying to oppress it. They were trying to make the state the authority of the church. Yeah. And in 1878 is when we have Pope Leo elected. And in 1891, he then releases the encyclical we're going to go through today called Rerum Novarum. And it's considered the birth of Catholic social teaching, as we discussed at the beginning. Now, because we're Australians, I thought it'd be good as well to give a bit of context in regards to Australia, the Catholic Church, and its engagement with Rerum Novarum, and the impact it sort of had, but also the impact and the amazing things we should be proud of as Australians that were had in the labour movements in the early industrialist revolution. So in 1856, so very early, Melbourne stonemasons win the 8-hour workday, a world first. So the general 8-hour workday that we all take for granted today, you could argue, and I do, and it was something I was really proud of as a young man, was formed in Australia. Yeah. If you go to Melbourne, I actually don't know the location, but there is like a monument that is commemorating this, and it's triple eights, and it's to commemorate the 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of sleep. Yeah, a beautiful thing for Australian history. In 1890, leading up to a year before Rerum Novarum, so you can see the bubbling up in Australia, right? So it was really important, I guess, that this document was produced. There was something known as the Great Maritime Strike, and Cardinal Moran, who, if you don't know who that is, that was a cardinal in Australia. His statue is actually on one of the pillars on the steps towards St. Mary's Cathedral. He supported those workers in those strikes. He wasn't there, but he wrote support. He gave them courage. He prayed for them. I think all the above. Okay. Now, in 1891, when Rerum Novarum was published, Australian bishops and Catholic press widely embrace it, and Cardinal Moran begins immediately to give lectures on its messages to lay faithful, to Catholic, like important leaders, politicians, people in the social sphere, political sphere, industrial sphere. Now, this may seem funny to us today, especially because the Labor Party has sort of changed so much. But in 1901, Cardinal Moran actually praised the ALP, the Labor Party of Australia, as aligned with Catholic social teaching. Yeah. And you'll see that we'll get to it, that how this rift occurred in the Labor Party. In 1907, Australia establishes a living wage. In 1931, there's a society of students formed called the Campion Society, founded by lay Catholic University students. And then prominent members are Frank May, Kevin T. Kelly, and Bob Santamaria, B.A. Santamaria. Now, he's a very influential person, that not many Australians know today. He was a prominent Catholic who, in 1940, was enlisted by Archbishop Mannix, who we saw the photo of, to lead a movement to combat communism in the Labor movements, in the Labor Party and the union movements. So Archbishop Mannix realised that the ALP and other labour unions and other movements were being infiltrated by communism and being anti-Catholic. And so Archbishop Mannix asked Bob Santamaria, because Bob Santamaria was a very industrious young man. He was a great rhetorician, logician. He could argue. He was very smart, very intellectual. Just Google his name. You'll find he used to have a TV show back in the 80s and the 90s. He has a biography. He's done a number of interviews. Please watch them. He's a hero to many conservative Australian politicians, but he was thoroughly Catholic. He wasn't very spiritual. He talks about that. He's not very spiritual. He doesn't really talk much about the faith, but it guides him in every single way. And so that led to, in 1955, Bob Santamaria generally blamed for the split in the Labor Union. They call him, the evil guy who destroyed the Labor Party. But in 1955, the Labor Party split. Okay, so a large contingent of predominantly Catholics and anti-communists were actually expelled from the ALP. The ALP leadership expelled them from the party, and then these expelled members eventually formed, which still exists today, the Democratic Labor Party of Australia, which reflect the Catholic social teachings. That party has changed, obviously, but this is some really interesting history to see how Catholic social teaching has shaped Australia and our politics, our social life, our labour laws, everything. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So let's get in now into the Rerum Novarum, and what I've done is I've broken up into key areas of teaching which are laid out like that in the document. Okay, so we're not going to go through the whole document. We're going to go through parts of it. I won't read everything, but I just get the gist of it so we could truly understand what the teachings were of the um, encyclical. So we have the errors of socialism. First and foremost, it's brought to the forefront by Pope Leo XIII. And as you can see, we have Karl Marx in the background. So as we see here, these are quotes directly from Rerum Novarum. And so what Pope Leo focuses on, he talks about how socialists exploit class envy by promoting the abolition of private property. So he says here, to remedy these wrongs of socialists, working on the poor man's envy of the rich, are striving to do away with private property. And then he talks about how abolishing private property would ultimately harm the workers the most. Yeah. And the motivation behind labor, Pope Leo teaches, is desire to acquire and retain property, private property. So as he quote, when a man engages in remunerative labor, the impelling reason and motive of his work is to obtain property and thereafter to hold it as his very own. And we can all relate to that, yeah? So you work, you get your wage, you buy things to live. You may pay a mortgage, it's owning actual property like real estate, but you may also buy a car in order to fulfill your duties as a husband or wife or just a general in terms of person to society. Okay, so let's continue. Socialist proposals undermine wage earners, right, by denying them the freedom to use their earnings as they see fit. So what he argues is the fact that socialists try to undermine the working man by denying him the freedom to gain property actually affects the workers really badly and actually leads to worse outcomes for them. It strikes at their interest. As he writes here, socialists strike at the interest of every wage earner. Yeah, since they would deprive him the liberty of disposing his wages and thereby of all hope and possibility of increasing his resources and of bettering his condition in life. Right? So what Pope Leo is teaching here is eliminating private ownership removes the worker's opportunity to improve his living conditions and build a better life. Yeah, very clear, very concise, and I think as Catholics we can all agree with that. He then moves on to explain the natural right to private property. Yeah, and this is a picture from the early 1900s in, believe it or not, somewhere in the CBD of Sydney. And it's very poor. It's very run down. It's actually something we don't even fathom today. And at the start of it, he makes it very clear. Quote, every man has by nature the right to possess property as his own. Very clear. Human beings, right? He starts to talk about is there. He fleshes out what human beings are and what makes them different to beasts or animals. And he talks about how human beings, unlike animals, have reason, which and and thus the right to stable, lasting possessions, not just temporary use, because we can understand, we can transform things through our will, through our actions in the world. And in a sense, he also talks about how reason and our intellect is what makes us truly made in the image and likeness of God. Okay. He further talks about how man must possess not only the fruits of the earth, but also the land itself to provide for present and future needs. Okay. He talks about how, quote, his right to possess things not merely for temporary momentary use, as well as hold them in stable and permanent possession. Okay. It's really important. He talks about legacy, handing down. If you own something, you care more about it. You want to look after it. It is yours. You want to build it. You want to hand it on to your children. You, in a sense, have skin in the game. And there's something really important about having skin in the game. Okay. He then further talks about how the right to private property exists prior to the formation of the state and that it's grounded in the natural law. Okay. Quote, the fact that God has given the earth for the use and enjoyment of the whole human race can in no way be a bar to the owning of private property. Yeah. And so that is him talking about the universal destination of the earthly goods. And it does not contradict private ownership, okay? Land can serve all, even when it's privately owned, okay? Because by owning property, yeah, he says here, quote, man precedes the state and possesses prior to the formation of any state the right of providing for the substance of his body. So, in a sense, you own land, you till it, you use it, you transform it. It is used to produce life. It is used to produce substances to ensure human beings can survive and live with one another. Hence, further ownership then builds a community, builds a state, blah, 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 blah. All right. And the fact that God has given the earth for use for all, that the earth must care and serve all the goods of the earth, it doesn't take away the right to private ownership. Okay? Because he says here, quote, the earth, even though portion among private owners, ceases not thereby to minister to the needs of all. And it goes back to the importance of having skin in the game, and then as a virtue of Christian charity, ensuring what you have is for the common good. Yes, you own it. It is yours to look after. It is yours to build. It is yours to tend to. But at the same time, a true Christian will ensure that all he has is given to the common good of man. Yeah? Right. He then further talks about that just because man, not all men will maybe own land, it does not take away from their dignity. And he said those without land contribute through labor and are sustained by the wages tied to the produce of that land or what is exchanged from it. So, in a sense, he's bringing dignity to the worker, to the man, to the poor, to the person who doesn't have anything. Yeah. But he also teaches how when a person improves land through labor, those improvements become inseparably united with the land. So, though someone may own that land, it is their land, the person who tills it, works in it, who is the wage earner, also is inseparably united to that land. He has provided good to it. Yeah. And he is, in a sense, become part of it. And this is also a concept of the nation. Yeah. But we're not going to get into that. We're just going to focus on the simple things of the teaching so we can understand them and delve into them deeper, but also let them be a part of us. So, quote, he says here, that which has thus altered and improved the land becomes so truly part of itself as to be in great measure indistinguishable and inseparable from it. Beautiful. Now, he further teaches on private ownership that the principle of private ownership is affirmed by a natural law, yes, civil law, and long-standing human custom and divine law. So he's making the argument that it's in conformity with human nature, and that it can be argued for from a natural law perspective, that it can be argued from a civil law perspective, and that it can be seen to be a reality throughout all human history. And that God also in the scriptures and through his teachings also instituted the principle of private ownership. And he talks about how the scriptures uphold this legitimacy by prohibiting even the desire to unjustly possess what belongs to another. Yeah. So if there was no such concept as private ownership, there wouldn't be a commandment saying, do not covet thy neighbor's wife or his house or his ox or his field or vice versa. Yeah. And quote, private ownership as being preeminently in conformity with human nature. It's in conformity with human nature. And then he quotes Deuteronomy 5:21. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his house, nor his field, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is his. So that makes it very clear that there is, in a sense, the principle and the need for private ownership, but also the good of it. Pope Leo then looks into the family and the limits of of state power in regards to families, and this is really important. And it's really important, as you'll see as we go through this document. A lot of these issues still affect us today, and they're still pressing questions, though the conditions may be different and the situation. We still have a lot of the same problems. So, first and foremost, he teaches on the right to marriage and its primary purpose, which is procreation, which is the establishment of a family. So, and he argues that the marriage is established by God and cannot be abolished by human law. Okay, as we know today, the concept of marriage, the definition of marriage, especially as Catholics, has been butchered by many Western secular nations today, liberal democracies, and the church in its teaching has always taught that marriage is between a man and woman for the purpose of procreation, for the forming of families, and for the education and rearing and caring and raising of children in that sense. Okay. He says the family is a natural and true society older than any state. Yeah. So he says it's a society in itself, which is really a powerful thing to understand. For most people think today, they don't think of the family as a society or a really important unit to the formation of a larger state. Okay. And he says, quote, a society very small, but nonetheless a true society and one older than any state. Okay. Before there were states, there were families. And states or nations or cities are just small families who have come together to form a larger system. Okay. He then further teaches that fathers have a natural duty to provide for their children and family. Okay. And this is generally a teaching today in the modern church that many people have issues with, that the father, the husband, is the head of the household. He's the high priest, he's the head priest of the house. He's the head of his wife. And this can always get very controversial today. But it's really important to know that this is all grounded in love, duty, and the command of God. Yeah? And he says that the father should provide all food and all necessaries for those who he has begotten. Okay? And so that's a sense of duty. A father should care, protect, serve, love his family. And in proper order, the father should be the one having to sacrifice himself, be burdened with labor and hardships, and that he can ensure that his wife and their children can be safe, fed, and that the children can have a real deep and beautiful relationship with their mother who can rear them, love them, give them that maternal love that no one else can give them. And so it's really important that we as Catholics really think about our family structures and how do we align it in the difficulties of the modern world, in the craziness of our economy, that we can truly live faithfully to what the church and the scriptures and God and tradition has taught throughout time. Okay, so moving on, he then states that society and the state exist to support families and not to hinder or oppress them. Okay, and so he says that if the state, in a sense, makes it harder for families, oppresses them, removes their rights, natural rights away, that what is the point of being in a commonwealth of a state? Like, what is the point of it? Because your rights are being attacked. So the state should do everything it should do to uphold them, but at the same time, not get too involved. And we'll get into that a bit later. Okay. We'll get into it now, actually. So Pope Leo further teaches that it's a serious error for the state to intrude unnecessarily into family life. Okay. And that the state should only intervene in justified cases of extreme distress or serious violation of justice within the household. Okay. So that could be like a good example, I guess, today is domestic violence. So if there's unfortunately, it is a major issue today, but I think it's been a major issue throughout all time. But I think more so today for a number of reasons, but I won't get into today. But if there is a husband who's truly putting his wife at risk and his children, and he's being a tyrant and he's violent, it's good that the state comes in and removes that error and that evil to ensure the safety and protection of the mother and children. And so he then teaches that when intervention is warranted, like in a case we just spoke about in domestic violence, it must aim to protect the rights of the family, not replace them. Okay? You must protect the good of what it is to be a family, not change it, not remove it. Okay? And he talks about how parental authority over their children um, is rooted in nature and cannot be abolished or overtaken by the state. Okay? So he's, in a sense, quote, parental authority can be neither abolished nor absorbed by the state, but it is the same source as human life itself. And so he talks about how the socialists who really want to push the state to get involved, and you'll hear this today, where socialist adjacent people will actually say that they're not your kids. They'll say things like, these are our kids. When they say our kids, they're talking about they're the state's kids. And they look at the children as a resource. Yeah? Not as a human being who has been begotten with the two parents who have authority over him to care for, to love, to serve, but also that they are a further extension of their family and their whole ancestry. Yeah, it's a deeper, more spiritual, supernatural understanding. But they look at it as children as just solely something to be controlled by the state, owned by the state for the good of the state. Okay, and so he says the socialists, therefore, in setting aside the parent and setting up a state supervision, act against natural justice and destroy the structure of the home. And we can argue we see that today. Yeah, we can see that the state has gone involved in many family affairs, what it is to be a family, family law, all the above. And some of them are good. Some of them have, in a sense, protected the rights of the family and justice without violating it, and others haven't. And so this is an area we need to really think about deeply as parents, as Catholics. Okay, we'll move on. Now, Pope Leo then gets into the importance of religion and its being essential to the social reform needed in the time. And so he talks about how true and lasting solutions to social conflicts are impossible without the church and the authority of the gospel. Okay? He further then clarifies that the church not only teaches truth, but also guides personal and social societal conduct through moral precepts. Yeah? And this is a hard concept for many people today, many moderns, we could argue, is because, one, many people, including Catholics, don't believe in the authority of the church. But more so, most people are moral relativists today. Yeah, they don't think that there is a grounding of truth, like an actual truth. They think, oh, it's my truth, or society today deems this good, therefore it's good. Whereas Catholics, we believe that morality, truth is grounded in a person of Jesus Christ. Yeah, in God Himself, in the Logos, in being. Yeah, think about that. If the being, the creator of everything, right? Without Him, there is nothing. Without Him, there is no us. He is the ultimate goodness. He's the truth. Therefore, all truth leads to Him, and by that sense, whatever God teaches or has taught, and His church, and this goes back to the authority of the church, and His church has taught throughout time, immemorial, is true, and therefore, even if we don't understand it, we should live by it. Yeah, and Pope Leo is talking about how that the church ensures that what man lives by is true, and his conduct is truly aligned with what is morally true. Yeah. Moving on, he then talks about how there are inequalities among people, so in talents, in abilities, and circumstances, and that's totally natural, and it's actually necessary for functioning society. And he talks about, in a sense, he's forming an understanding of God's beautiful creation and the hierarchies he creates for a reason. And quote, he says, far from being disadvantageous either to individuals or community, maintained by means of various kinds of capacity for business and the playing of many parts. So he's saying that though there are differences of people, it's far from being like a disadvantage to the people themselves or to the community, because social and public life can only be maintained by means of various kinds of capacities. Yeah, we all have a role to play, all of us. Yeah. And as Catholics, we should really start to look at this in the changing industrial workplace market, because AI is really going to affect that. Yeah. The menial tasks we tend to take for granted do give many people value and meaning and hope and a way to give back to their fellow man and to glorify God. Yeah. So the next time, we go get a coffee or we see someone sweeping the floor in our office or things we take for granted, remember that that person is needed, because without them, that job wouldn't get done. And so you should thank them and tell them you love them in Christian charity. Yeah. He further talks about how social differences contributed positively to the community and that they allow that diverse role and responsibility. And it's a good. Yeah. But he also understands that human suffering and hardship are inevitable. And due to those consequences of sin, which are part of the human condition, we tend to attempt to eliminate suffering through purely human means, and we are just doomed to fail if that's our approach. Yeah. Quote, pains and hardships of life will have no end or cessation on earth. He's very clear in that teaching. And as Catholics today, my observations are we have sort of lost an understanding of what it is to suffer. Yeah. And how we align that suffering with Christ. And so our sufferings and hardships, we tend to want to get away from, run away from, or we have this idea of doing all these things and create heaven on earth. And in a sense, we should do things to make things better for the glory of God, but we will never get there without Him. But that's heaven. It's already done. It's already apparent. And so we need to learn to really just be with Christ, do what we can, but also know that no matter what we do as human beings, we will always have that propensity or um, you know, we're just going to suffer. Can't say it any other way. Um, Quote, he says, pains and hardships of this life will end in no cessation on earth. And then he goes to say, to suffer and to endure, therefore, is the lot of humanity. Very clear. Yeah. He then further goes into how secular ideologies, and he doesn't name them here, but he's talking about communists and socialists, that because man suffers, there are people out there who promise a perfect society and mislead these people. And what they'll ultimately do is cause them further harm. So, quote, he says, he's talking about the socialists here, they delude the people, and their lying promises will only one day bring forth evils worse than the present. Think about it. This was written in 1891. The Russian Revolution happened, I believe, like 1917, 1918, in the World War One. And then we see the growth of the Soviet Union, which is a socialist communist utopia. And then it grows and all the above. And then when it falls apart in the 80s, all this information, all these stories come out about the immensity of death and suffering and hell on earth. Okay? All you need to do is Google Soviet Union, Ukrainian plague or famine. which was orchestrated by the central government. It was a man-made famine with this deluded idea that it was for a greater good. And then you see how everyone in the Soviet Union were constantly scared of being caught. They were even worried about their own children, dobbing them in to go to jail. It was hell on earth. Yeah. In regards to that famine, I read stories about parents eating their own children because they were that hungry. It was godless. And so, in a sense, Pope Leo, not in a sense, he did. He foresaw the logical outcome of socialism and communism. So let us not make that same mistake today. Because remember, as the church has always taught, as men, we're always going to suffer. Life is always going to be hard. And that no promises from anything we think we can do or other men will bring heaven about. Okay? What we should focus on as Catholics is to try to build the kingdom of heaven, of course, remove suffering where it's not needed, undue suffering. But we need to align our hearts with God, His church, live a sacramental life, grow in our prayer, become saints, let the Holy Spirit transform us into an icon of Christ so that we can truly, when the time comes when we die, truly experience heaven. We can share in the beatific vision and truly have and be in heaven. Okay? He then further goes into the duties of workers and employers. So not just the duties of employers, he also teaches that workers have a duty. Yeah? Because Pope Leo doesn't want to disband the hierarchy that occurs. He understands that it's sort of natural, but it must be ordered in Christian love and truth. Yeah. So he talks about how employers must treat workers with their dignity and respect, recognizing their inherent worth as persons, not as mere tools for profit. Yeah. And then he further states that honorable, honest labor should not be viewed as shameful. The fact that it allows a person to earn a decent and respectable livelihood is a good. Quote, working for gain is credible and not shameful, right? Since it enables him to earn an honorable livelihood. Beautiful. It's good to work. It's good in a sense and not shameful to not be the guy at the top. Because you're a child of God. You are loved. Okay? He then further states that it's immoral and inhumane to exploit workers solely for physical labor or financial gain. Okay? It's immoral to look at your fellow man as an end to their means, a tool for you to get richer. Because in a sense, you're not even looking at a person anymore, you're looking at a thing. And employers have a duty, right, to consider workers' spiritual, moral well-being, not just material output. So he argues here that employers don't just, they need to really look at their people, as children of God, who are spiritual beings as well as physical beings, and that yes, because they're employed, they should do their work in terms of their output, but they should also be given time and conditions that support their religious practice, ensure family life is maintained, and that moral integrity isn't abused. Yeah. Not going to go too much to this one. He then further talks about how justice requires that workers be paid what they are rightfully owed without withholding wages, because to do so is a grave injustice. Okay. He even says here to defraud anyone of wages that are his due is a great crime which cries to the avenging anger of heaven. Behold the hire of the laborers, which by fraud has been kept back by you, crieth, and the cry of them hath entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabbath. That's in James 5:4. Right? It's there, it's in the Bible, it is written, it's a teaching, it's a cry to heaven and a grave injustice if you withhold wages. And he further talks about how the wages of the poor are especially sacred due to their vulnerability and limited means. Okay, that's a real powerful statement there. Okay, and he further states how employers must avoid all unjust practices such as coercion, deceit, exploitation that reduce a worker's just earnings. And in any sense, he's talking about the power plays here. Okay, it says here, quote, "The rich must religiously refrain from cutting down the workman's earnings, whether by force, by fraud, or by usurious dealings, and with all the greater reason, because the laboring man is, as a rule, weak and unprotected, and because his slender means should, in proportion to their scantiness, be accounted sacred." And we, in a sense, in our justice system today, have laws against this behavior. There was recently, a few years ago, a very big case where 7-Eleven was caught underpaying people, and now they've had to, they were taken to court and they lost, and now they have to pay people back. So justice was demanded. But it happens a lot still today. And as a Catholic man, woman, if you run a business, truly know that if you do any of this behavior and you don't have any remorse or fear of God in this regard, I pray for your soul, because you're truly committing a mortal sin in that sense. Okay. Moving on to the perspective on earthly wealth. Yeah. Pope Leo talks about how earthly life and material goods must be understood in a greater light towards the eternal, where true and lasting happiness begins. Yeah. So, in a sense, that common Catholic theme of we are pilgrims here on a journey towards heaven. Talked about how wealth or poverty has no bearing on eternal destiny, and what matters is how material goods are used. So, if you're a man with $1 billion and you did no good with the goods you were given, well, it's no good for you when you like. It's not you accruing $1 billion doesn't mean you're gonna have eternal life. It's the good you did with what God granted you. Okay. Quote, "The only important thing is to use them aright." Beautiful. Clear. He further teaches how Christ did not eliminate suffering, but transformed it into a path to virtue and eternal reward. And how Christians are endued to suffering with hope, following Christ's example and drawing on his grace. So, quote, "No man can hope for eternal reward unless he follow in the blood-stained footprints of his Savior." Yeah, and then he quotes 2 Timothy 2, verse 12, "If we suffer with him, we shall also reign with him." Yeah, beautiful. He further teaches that, providing for one's own needs and family is just and proper, but excess beyond this should be shared with those in need. And that almsgiving is a duty of a Christian, not of civil law, but it's morally binding that we must, when our needs allow us, to engage in that. And that he makes very clear that Christ identifies with the poor with acts of mercy towards them, and that they are counted. When you do that good, it's counted towards, like you doing a good towards Christ himself. Okay. He then further teaches on how the wealthy must not rely on riches for happiness, and rather they should fear the responsibility that comes with the wealth. Right? That's a big statement. And he further teaches that all possessions should be regarded as held in trust for the good of others, not as just private use, like private selfish use. Quote, "Man should not consider his material possessions as his own, but as common to all, so as to share them without hesitation when others are in need." Yeah. Whence the apostles with command whence the apostles with command the rich of this world to offer with no stint to apportion largely. And that was directly quoted from St. Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologiae. Yeah. Furthermore, he further teaches that and reaffirms that the church teaches that those with abundance should generously share with those in need and seeing wealth as a means of doing good. And it's a duty that should not be enforced by human law, as we mentioned previously. But quote, he says here, but the laws and judgments of men must yield place to the laws and judgments of Christ, the true God, who in many ways urges on his followers the practice of almsgiving. Quote, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20. And who will count kindness done, refused to the poor, as done or refused to himself? As long as you did it to one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Matthew 25. Yeah. And that goes back to what I said before, how when we do out of Christian love, out of in a prayerful means, in a means to glorify God, to worship him, to adore him, to love him, follow him, what we do to that poor person or to the person in need, in love, we're doing it to Christ. Let us see the face of Jesus in all men. Yeah. And this goes to the poor. Talks about the poor, leading on from that. He talks about how poverty is not a disgrace in God's eyes, and that earning a living through honest labor is honorable. So he in a sense, reaffirms that. He talks about, he teaches that Christ himself embraced poverty and humble labor. And in a sense, he then gave dignity to the working poor. Further affirms that Jesus has special love for the poor and the sorrowful, the oppressed. He called them blessed. Quote, Jesus Christ calls the poor blessed. Matthew 5. He lovingly invites those in labor and grief to come to him for solace. Matthew 11. And he displays the tenderest charity toward the lowly and the oppressed. Beautiful. Christian teaching, he further states, promotes unity and brotherhood across all social classes by affirming shared human dignity, origin, and destiny in God. Quote, men are children of the same common Father, who is God. And he further affirms that all people are equally redeemed in Christ and called to the same eternal inheritance, regardless of earthly status. Right? Quote, God is who alone make either men or angels absolutely and perfectly happy, that each and all are redeemed and made sons of God by Jesus Christ, the firstborn among many brethren, that the blessing of nature and the gifts of grace belong to the whole human race in common, and that from none except the unworthy is withheld the inheritance of the kingdom of heaven. If sons, heirs also, heirs indeed of God and co-heirs with Christ. Romans 8:17. Yeah. I don't need to further teach on that. He's done that. Scripture's done that. He further goes on to speak about how the church, not only in its mission and its work, identifies the root causes of social issues, but actually should apply remedies through grace and pastoral outreach. And that the church has done this throughout time. He then further makes the statement that a true healing of society, and we can argue, I would argue even this today, requires a return to Christian life and principles from which it originally grew. Yeah? Quote, if human society is to be healed now, in no other way can it be healed save by a return to Christian life and Christian institutions. When a society is perishing, the wholesome advice to give to those who would restore it is to call it to the principles from which it sprang. Yeah? And we can see that. We reject what we've inherited even today, and we see further decay, chaos, brokenness, isolation, loneliness, what communities? People don't even talk to each other. I live in an apartment building with 20 other units. I know 2 people in that whole building. I have people walk right by me, not even say hello, don't even know my name. Yeah, you try, they're cold, they're blocked off. Yeah. He further talks about how the church actively seeks to uplift the poor, encourage them to improve their condition in life. So not just leaving them poor, like we said before, the church aim is to build the kingdom up, but it also knows its limitations as just men. But at the same time, it should approach that, and that unjust suffering or unjust circumstances shouldn't just be left there. We should do what we can to do what is good for our fellow man, in the image, like in the mind of Christ, the church, his teachings, all the Bible. And then he further reiterates that the church directly supports the poor through charitable institutions, religious orders, and associations. Okay. And then, quote, such was the ardor of brotherly love among the earliest Christians that numbers of those who were in better circumstances despoiled themselves of their possessions in order to relieve their brethren, whence neither was there any one needy among them. Acts 4:34. Right? So he quotes this passage to make very clear that the church, not just now, but since its inception, has always directly cared for those in need. Okay. He then further states how the church, in its wisdom, has aimed to spare the poor. So they seek to help the poor discreetly, sparing them any shame and offering compassionate support in that sense. Yeah? Quote, in order to spare them from shame or begging, the church has provided aid for the needy. So in a sense, he's saying that the church has done all it can to remove shame from the people who need the assistance and aid them with a dignity. Yeah. He then further critiques the modern movements that's welfare states. We live in a welfare state now, but that didn't really exist when this was written. And he talks about how, unlike state-run welfare systems, Christian charity is personal, sacrificial, and rooted in the love of Christ. And that true charity flows from the heart of Jesus and belongs to the church. Turning away from the church is turning away from Christ. And we can see that today. I've done this. I'm sure many of you have. We do this not only to the government, but even to our church. We see an injustice. We see something that we know as Christians we should address or something should be done about it. But we say, oh, I'm sure there's a program out there that'll do it. Or I'm sure that the church will do something about it, or Father will do something about it. And it's not saying we can fix the problem. Right? We're not called to fix the problem. But could you have shown love? Could you have given that person some dignity? And granted, we have to be wise because sometimes we can just jump into things and they can be dangerous situations or vice versa. But because there's a system built around us, and I know because I work in the social services industry, and it's a good these things exist, but we have also, in a sense, removed Christian charity in how we should approach and solve problems. We look at solving problems very methodically in terms of like outcomes, resources, when really like you want to solve domestic violence. Number one, reaffirm the good of marriage, the God given command of marriage, what it truly means to suffer for, to strive with, to become one, to love. Set the ideal up here in a Christian charity, a Christian love. You won't fix everything, but you may have better families, you may have better marriages, you may have better communities. We need to stop looking at everything so transactionally as children of the Catholic Church and do what we can, but always with a heart of bringing dignity to the situation. Yeah. All right. Pope Leo further goes into the role of the state and how the primary duty of the state, unfortunately, is to ensure laws and institutions promote both public and welfare, and that a flourishing society is generally built on moral governance, strong family life, respect for religion, justice and fair taxation, as well as economic development. Uh, but that all citizens have equal dignity no matter where they are in the hierarchy, and that workers, in a sense, should be treated with full and rightful citizens, and that there should be a concept of distributive justice, which ensures fair treatment and benefits to all social classes without favoriting the people with power. And I want to focus on the second paragraph here in this slide where it says a state chiefly prospers and thrives through moral rule, well-regulated family life, respect for religion and justice, the moderation and fair imposing of public taxes, the progress of the arts and of trade, the abundant yield of the land through everything, the interest of all, whether high or low, are equal. Meditate on it. Our state's doing this. Fair imposing of public taxes, well-regulated family life. Is there respect for God, for religion? Yeah. Ownership. Not for us to get angry, but for us to think about as Catholics how can we understand this? Let's be realistic of where and what we live in, and how we, through our mission to become holy, to serve God, His church, that we can sanctify and provide a remedy to this fallen world, which is Christ. Yeah. Pope Leo then provides a few very in-depth paragraphs on the dignity of the worker. And as you can see, there is generally in his encyclical here a focus on the poor, on the worker. But in no time does he demonize the wealthy. He just tells them what is correct living in regards to the teachings of Christ, of God. But he reaffirms the church's teachings to care for all, especially the poor, especially those that are needy. And he states that the poor are disadvantaged and deserve special protection from the state, quite clearly, as they lack the means to defend their own rights. They don't have the resources, the money. We see that. We see that today, right? It's always going to be a problem. As Christ said, the poor will always be with us. He talks about how the wealthy have greater resources and access to protection, making state intervention less necessary for them, right? Because they have the means to do so. Quote, says he, the richer class have many ways of shielding themselves and stand less in need of help from the state. Right? Whereas the mass of the poor have no resources of their own to fall back upon and must chiefly depend on the assistance of the state in regards to legal matters. Talks about how wage earners being vulnerable should receive focused care and support from public authorities, and that the state must guard against agitators who incite violence or disorder, protecting both workers and property owners from manipulation and harm, but also creating a sense of social cohesion. Yeah. In a sense, here he's further critiquing the socialists. And he said that the state should ensure that it intervenes in a way where these protests and the issues the workers have can be addressed in justice and rightly, because we'll get into it, that workers generally will be angry and protest when their conditions aren't great. And so the state should do all it can to ensure fair outcome for both the owner of the capital and the working class. But should also ensure that chaos doesn't ensue and that it limits disturbances to the civil order. And he says, strikes often arise due to unjust conditions with long hours, harsh labor, and that they proactively address this cause. Yeah. So, quote, the law should forestall and prevent such troubles from arising. They should lend their influence and authority to the removal in good time of the causes which lead to conflicts between employers and employees, or employers and employed. Okay. He says workers' interests, especially the spiritual well-being of their souls, must be protected as a matter of priority. And all people, regardless of class, he reaffirms they have dignity before God, and then the state must reflect that in its dealings and how it functions. Quote, life on earth, however good and desirable in itself, is not the final purpose for which man is created. It is a soul which is made after the image and likeness of God. In the respect, all men are equal. Clear as day. Right. He then moves into the sanctity of rest. Now, this is a commandment. Thou shalt not work on the Sabbath, they shall rest. The Catholic, you're called on a Sunday to refrain from servile work. It's a precept of the church to attend. It's a precept of the Catholic Church to go to Mass on a Sunday. Yeah, if you're not following the precepts of the church, well, get to confession, set things right. It is a sin. You're commanded by God. And can you really not offer our Lord 45 minutes, 1 hour of your time on a Sunday? Pope Leo goes further into this, yeah? He talks about how rest from labor should not be used for idleness or immoral indulgence, but it should be focused on sanctification by religious observance. So generally people think, oh, Sunday, I'm just going to bum around, do nothing, whatever. But he talks about how true rest involves turning away from worldly concerns and to focus on spiritual matters and the worship of God. Yeah? And quote, rest, combined with religious observances, disposes man to forget for a while the business of everyday life, to turn his thought to things heavenly and to the worship which he so strictly owes to the eternal Godhead. Very clear. And maybe something most of us haven't really understood or thought about for a long time. We generally think Sunday means I can't do nothing. I'm just gonna bum around and watch Netflix all day. No. He says rest has a divine origin, and it's rooted in the commandment to keep the Sabbath. And it's about really lifting our hearts and minds to God. He further states how observing Sunday rest strengthens the soul and fulfills a moral and religious obligation. It's a matter of justice to God, but also like beautiful. Like, why wouldn't you want to glorify Christ, Father, the Spirit, the God who came in the flesh, dwelt among us, died for us, gave himself for us, rose from the dead, given us hope, given us redemption, love, everything. And on top of that, as a Catholic, we believe in the true presence in the Holy Sacrament of the Eucharist. You can come to know him, you can be with him, he can be within you, you can be within him. You can truly encounter him every Sunday. Why would you not want that? Yeah. Moving back to the temple, Pope Leo further teaches on the importance of just wages, and that every person has a natural right to secure the means necessary for living, primarily through labor. But he's very clear in regards to that, that it's not unreasonable in the sense of he talks about how if a man can be provided the needs for a just wage and he can live frugally, he says, yeah, and that he can feed and provide for his family and save a little money on the side, that this is justice. This is a good. Yeah. He says it's a serious injustice to pay wages that are insufficient for a worker to live a decent and modest life. Modest life, yeah, frugal life. So he says, quote here, wages ought not to be insufficient to support a frugal and well-behaved wage earner. So he's not saying that you got to up the wages because all these workers have bad habits, or they drink their money away, they gamble. You gotta do that for them poor things. No, he's saying like wage should like ensure that a worker could put a roof over his family's head, he can feed them, he can educate them, and they can put a bit of money on the side for a rainy day. Good. Quite simple, yeah. Um, he then talks about how with a fair wage, workers can practice thrift, build savings, and gain long-term security. So there's always a larger vision involved, and then that brings back to his idea of potentially these workers who save their money, who do the right things, who are frugal, will eventually be able to afford private property, and that by that they can further improve their well-being and their state in life, further reducing poverty in society. Yeah. He further teaches that like laws and policies should support and expand opportunities for people, especially workers, to become property owners, and that encouraging widespread ownership of land and productive assets will help reduce that class divide and foster better social harmony. It says here, quote, if working people can be encouraged to look forward to obtaining a share in the land, the consequences will be that the gulf between vast wealth and sheer poverty will be bridged over. Okay? Very clear, very logical. Can't complain. So we're going to move into worker associations, or as we would know in Australia, unions. And he teaches on this. He says that human beings are naturally seek the support of others due to our weakness and our limitations, and that there is generally an inclination that leads people to form communities in order to, in a sense, gain an outcome that there's mutual aid, because it adds strength and resources to do so, and that associations, even if they're smaller than the state, are true societies, and then they fulfill a real human need, and that the state, if they in a sense oppress it or try to stamp it out, it's like a big contradiction. That because there's the right to form private associations, it's rooted in human nature, it can't be forbidden, and if the state does so, tries to forbid it and stamp it out, it's going against its nature, in the sense of the state exists to protect natural rights. This is a concept that is very foreign to us today. We've lost this idea of natural law, but he further, in a sense, solidifies the idea of the natural law, not the idea, the fact of the natural law, especially in Catholic anthropology, Catholic philosophy, Catholic understanding, and that if the state, in a sense, denies the right to form group societies, it contradicts its foundational purpose and it undermines its own legitimacy because it's going against what is natural. Yeah. We won't stay too long on this, but then he further goes into how associations or unions would be grounded in religion, right? And we spoke about how the Labor unions and the Labor Party in Australia had a fallout with Catholics because they swallowed the communist pill, and the atheistic and vice versa. And in a sense, Pope Leo teaches that work associations, right, the focus should be to improve the members' well-being, not only temporary but also in their soul, and that the primary focus of these associations must be like centered in religion and morality, not just for material gain. And that true success in that sense includes spiritual growth and the salvation and the sanctification of all involved, but not like merely material gain. Right? It's a very supernatural spiritual understanding, and that the members involved in these groups should be formed by the church, should be formed with religious teaching, and how that they have a duty towards God and how to live that out and work according and live out according to the faith. And that the people involved in these institutions should solely, in a sense, prioritize seeking God's kingdom above any temporal goal, and that they should be set apart from purely secular organizations, goals, aims, you know, because he says he quote, let our associations then look first and before all things to God. Let religious instruction have therein the foremost place, each one being carefully taught what is his duty to God, what he has to believe, what to hope for, and how he is to work. And what he's really like enforcing here is that as Catholics should be grounded in Christ, in the church. And if we're going to play the game of like, we're going to go against the state and we're going to try and get material, it's just, we're not going to like make the world better. We're not going to spread the word, the gospel. We're not going to show the light of Christ, the light of this, the gospel. We're just going to create more chaos. And so he's warning against that. He's saying like, yes, you have to do what is just and right and build the kingdom, but do it with Christ at its center. You know, are we doing that? I don't know. Sometimes like I get involved in things, or I've actually gotten out of things because I thought they were totally foreign and opposite to the teaching of the church and the Catholic faith. And other times I thought, by doing this, I'm going to corrupt my soul. It's a balance. It's a difficult one. But we really don't have many of these institutions today that are grounded in Christ. It's something that we as the faithful maybe need to start looking at building again in a world that is becoming more and more intolerant of our faith. And to end, we're at the end of the encyclical. Pope Leo really focuses on the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. And really beautiful. And he talks about how when we have justice and integrity in work, we can overcome prejudice and greed, and that we can win the respect and goodwill from society. As Christians, we should live. Yeah. Quote, prejudice, it is true, is mighty, and so is the greed of money. He's talking about how these vices and temptations can capture us and that we should look to bigger things. He talks about how Catholic associations can provide that spiritual, moral, and practical refuge for workers who have been exploited or misled, especially by false promises, and that many workers who suffer mistreatment and feel trapped in unjust systems and lack the support of courage to break free. That these Catholic groups can be an incapable service to evangelization, to the mission of the church, by being that encounter of Christ, and then they can welcome the fallen and those who have fallen from the church, who have forgotten the church, or those that are but are uncertain or fearful, and they can recover their dignity, recover their faith, recover their stability, give them that love and healing that they've lost in the hardships and brokenness of the world. He says, quote, Catholic associations are of incalculable service. By helping them out of their difficulties, inviting them to companionship, and receiving the returning wanderers to a haven where they may securely find repose. Yeah, are we doing that? Can we do that better? Further talks about how the solution to all these social evils lie in the restoration of Christian morals, not just structural reforms, and that all sectors, in terms of government, employers, and workers, have a role in addressing social issues through lawful, just, and cooperative means, and that religion is essential to addressing the root cause of these injustices and divisions in society. Yeah, and that most importantly, the clergy, the church, must actively preach and live out gospel values, setting examples of charity and perseverance in promoting the common good. Yeah, and like when we go to mass and the homilies and the priests and the bishops, so they should be emboldening us to continue this and to teach us correctly and guide us correctly. Quote, gospel doctrines of Christian life by every means in their power. They must strive to secure the good of the people and above all must earnestly cherish in themselves and try to arouse in others charity. Yeah. Charity lived out, patience, kindness, and selflessness is a true foundational virtue needed to rebuild a just and compassionate society, a society grounded in the Gospels, a society that truly can dwell in the warm, safe, loving depths of the most sacred-hearted Jesus. And he ends his encyclical by quoting 1 Corinthians, charity is patient, is kind, seeketh not her own, suffereth all things, endureth all things. Yeah. At the end of all that intellectually rich, beautiful arguments he made, teaching, the end of it, who is that charity? Who is that love? It's God. Let's make sure we always set our hearts towards God. Yeah. It's really important. Sometimes we forget this stuff. We really do. So that's my presentation on Rerum Novarum. I hope it was insightful to you. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you learned something. I hope it's going to encourage you to go roam and seek more, delve deeper, go read it yourself. You know. But I just want to, before we end, I want to focus on a statement by Pope Pius the 11th, who wrote in an encyclical on the 30th anniversary of Rerum Novarum called Quadragesimo Anno, 40 years. And really for us to sit with what he said, to really let it remain with you so that when you do go out in the world with your Catholic roaming mind, you can truly understand the depths of the church, of its wisdom, of its beauty, of all it has to offer. In regards to Rerum Novarum, Pope Pius XI stated that it's the Magna Carta upon which all Christian activity in the social field ought to be based. Further quoted, at a time when it was most opportune and actually necessary, it laid down for all mankind the surest rules to solve aright that difficult problem of human relations called the social question. Don't forget, we're children of God. We should bring the gospel of Christ to all. Live it. Pray. Go to mass. Do some spiritual reading. Discuss these things with people. Discuss it with me. So please, if you like this presentation, like and subscribe. Join me. I'm aiming to do many of these. I can't do them weekly or regularly, but they do take a lot of work, especially with a young family. But I will continue to do it because they don't only benefit you, but they benefit me. So this is a selfish endeavor. So please like and subscribe. God bless you if you've watched this video. Share it, like the channel, like the video, and may the risen Christ guide you well. God bless.